Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, here with my co-host Nick Olson. We got a little bit different format today if you're watching on video because I'm on a business trip and forgot everything I needed to record, so I'm doing it off my phone. That's
That
why
is
I'm
our
all
level of
vertical
commitment
over here.
to you viewers and listeners. Late nights, traveling work, but we've got a really big game that we want to talk about that just happened, and as well as another big game coming up. So we wanted to make sure we didn't miss this week. But yeah, that Bills game was. Would you say that was the most like craziest Vikings game you've ever seen? It's up there with, I think, that, what is it, 2012 Ravens game, and I think it exceeds it
Yeah,
because the craziness started happening before the 2 minute mark in this one. That's kind of when it kicked off into super high gear. And then the
it
Minneapolis Miracle, which was not as quite as up and down as this one was. So I got to say, maybe the Miracle takes the place for the one single play, although the Jefferson catch is up there. But for an entire game, I think this is immediately number one in the pantheon of Vikings games.
in terms of the amount of emotions, the amount of conflicting emotions I was feeling one after the other in this game, like I think this takes the cake. I think you make a good point with that 2013 Ravens game, which if you haven't seen the ending to the 2013 Ravens game, even though the Vikings lose the game, it's the most ridiculous last 2 minutes of a football game I've ever seen. There are so many big plays. It's super fun to watch. Like if anybody listening to this has not seen that, I highly recommend checking it out. And then obviously, it doesn't reach the level of a win that I think the Minneapolis Miracle does because obviously it's not a playoff game. Obviously, it's not like us, kind of exercising the demons against the Saints, like all that sort of emotion that comes into there. But just in terms of like how frustrated I was at the Vikings and their situation, turning around into just being very excited, turning around to being mad at the refs, turning around to Patrick Peterson sealing that game-winning interception. Like I think it was just a full gamut of emotions, and we got a lot of ref hatred in there as well. So I think that helped quite a bit. But it was
It
just
had
an
the feel of a
absolute,
playoff game
absolute
though,
wild game.
because like it wasn't a playoff game, but it was against like probably the favorite for the Super Bowl, or at least it was going into the week, the Super Bowl favorites. And the Vikings have won seven straight like one score games. But it was kind of like that. Well, are the Vikings for real? And for a while, when we were down 17, it was kind of like, okay, I guess the Vikings aren't for real. This is who they are. They'll beat one possession games against the Lions or whatever, but they're not when it comes to like the Buffalo Bills. They can't compete with the big dogs. And then the fact that they pulled the win out, I think it was really a statement game for the Vikings. Especially with Josh Allen playing and looking completely uninhibited by that UCL injury, and like Bills, I won't say at full strength, but the fact that they had Allen and a lot of their other superstars, Von Miller played, Stephon Diggs played. We went up against all these guys and still came out with a win. That felt very like it felt like a very very meaningful game. And I will say like Minneapolis Mirror, if you're going to compare single plays, like yes, like the Vikings' chance of winning the Minneapolis Miracle game was like probably like 1% before the pass to Diggs, but also like the Vikings' chance of winning this game, I've never ever seen somebody fumble the ball on the goal
Yes.
line for a touchdown. So like this is one of those games that I feel like a lot of us are going to wind up like years from now. It's going to be one of those games where it's like, where were you when this happened, and what was your experience watching this? Like for me, I watched the end of the game with my daughter, and she's like she's 5, and she's like at the age where her friends are like into the Giants, they're like into football. So she's like trying to get into it. So she's like asking me about it. And it's like, what's going to happen next? And it's like, did the purple team win? And I'm like, on like 3 separate occasions, I was like, no, I guess the purple team isn't going to win this time, but that's okay because sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. The Vikings have been lucky to like win a lot of games. It happened like at the fourth quarter mark. It happened after they didn't convert that fourth down on the goal line. And before the botched snap, it happened in overtime after the Vikings didn't get a touchdown and Josh Allen was driving down the field. So many times I was like, this is just a crazy game. Whereas it was so many times I was like, yeah, okay, this isn't over. Oh wait, actually it is. So fun
Yeah.
game.
Yeah, I had a let's see. I think about Kirk's second interception. Like, I don't normally drink during football games, but sometimes I'll have a beer or something. And after Kirk's second interception, I was like, all right, I kind of need a beer for this, right? Because it was just like you could tell this game was going down the tubes at that point in time. We were down 14 points, I think, coming out of halftime, throwing a pick. Yeah, maybe that was the second drive of the second half for us, but throwing a pick against the Bills of all teams, you kind of felt like the game was over. And it was just every single play I was losing my mind. Like, you get those two sacks and it's 4th and 19, and Justin Jefferson makes that catch, and it's like, what? He caught it. He caught it. How did he catch it? And then between Kirk being short at the goal line and that play, I think the stat has gone around. The only other play where there's been a defensive touchdown within 2 minutes where the other team had a lead and basically could have knelt to run the ball out, to run the game out, is the miracle at the Meadowlands, right? Where I think it was the Giants chose specifically to not kneel in a situation where they could have kneeled and ran the ball and fumbled, and it was returned for a touchdown by, I think, Herm Edwards. And this is a little bit of a different situation because the Bills had to move the ball forward to be able to continue to run the clock, right? Because if they just kneel, it's a safety. So we got a little bit lucky with that circumstance, but it's literally a once in a lifetime play. Like, the only time something like this has happened is in, literally a single time. Like, when teams have the ability to kneel to run the clock out, there has never been an instance in NFL history, at least. I think there may have been one or two in college where they've fumbled the snap and lost the ball. And again, the reason the Bills fumbled the snap here, I think, is because Josh Allen is trying to go forward, right? It's not the easiest center exchange when you're trying to go forward on a quarterback sneak. So it kind of makes sense to me why he fumbles the ball, but still, it's just absolutely wild, like unbelievable in terms of a miracle play for the Vikings, because if they don't get that, they lose the game. The Bills are able to run the clock out. And then past that play, right, the game's not even over, which was the wild part, right? You're like, oh wow, the Vikings recover the ball in the end zone. It's a touchdown. They're up 3 points. There's 40 seconds left. Well, guess what? You've got 40 seconds left, and you're only up 3 against Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. They moved the ball down the field. They had that really questionable reffing decision. And I kind of want to get your opinion on this, Nick, because we haven't really talked about it. It's been, in the national media this week, I think there's been a narrative that the Vikings got a little lucky to win against the Bills, right? And one of the big things I've seen, well, first of all, if you look at DVOA, the Vikings had a negative DVOA in this game, right? We weren't as efficient on offense as the Bills. The Bills were a lot more efficient than us. And we also recovered all 4 fumbles in the game. Now, the 2 fumbles on the Viking side were a couple of really silly plays, right? One was the first time Kirk got stepped on by Ed Ingram. He tosses it backwards to Dalvin Cook. It hits the ground. Dalvin's able to fall on it. That's not really a fumble that the defense had a shot of recovering. It was kind of a fluky play that turned into a fumble. The Josh Allen, fumble for a touchdown, also a fluky play that turned into a fumble. But Kirk's second fumble was a backwards pass to Dalvin that Dalvin dropped, right? And then he fell on. So I don't really think saying that there were 4 fumbles, even though DVOA is going to count them as fumbles, is really realistic in the game. The Vikings recovered 2 fumbles, maybe, that they should have had a 50-50 chance. So they only recovered 1 fumble. And then the other thing that I think is missed is, like, the refs screwed up 2 major plays towards the end of the game, right? Obviously, the Gabe Davis catch where the ball clearly hits the ground on replay. Gabe Davis, the most frustrating part about the process to me is Gabe Davis went out of bounds, so the clock was stopped on the play, right? I could understand a scenario where the booth doesn't have time to call in if they're letting the Bills run a play very quickly as they try to save clock, right, with a running clock. But they didn't have a running clock in this scenario. And that kind of adds to the frustration to me, where the booth can say, hold on, wait a minute, let our guys see this. Like, put your hand on the ball and slow the Bills down a little bit so we can take a look at a second angle and see if we want to review this or not. And then obviously the second one was, I believe, 1st and goal in overtime, where Dalvin Cook lost a bunch of yards because the Bills had 12 men on the field. They didn't review that one either. And on the next play, the Vikings ran the clock down almost to 0 on the play clock. They had to rush to get it off, I think, and that kind of contributed to a negative play there as well. So in terms of the balance between the Vikings, getting a little bit lucky with fluky plays, and I think they did get lucky with fluky plays. Obviously, that Jefferson catch I think is a huge. Even if it takes a ton of skill for Justin Jefferson to do it, it's still a fluky play, right? That's not something where if you give Justin 10 attempts at it, he's going to make it, two times maybe, right? So, where do you think the balance lies between the Vikings getting lucky and also kind of getting a little bit unlucky with the refs?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough thing to like parse out because you're right. The luck cut a lot of ways. I think it's hard to talk about I saw that Aaron Schatz at Football Outsiders, the ones who compiled DVOA, said one of the things that the Vikings have been getting very lucky on is penalty luck. Um, but you look at that Commanders game and the easy interception that flipped into a 49-yard Curtis Samuel touchdown. That doesn't really feel like referee luck, or missing the not even reviewing the Gabe Davis non-catch, which if you look at the replay angles was clearly not a catch. The missing the 12 men on the field on the goal line, missing there was another goal line offsides call, like the guy had his hand lined up not just in the neutral zone but literally on the Viking side of the ball. There was a lot of that going on in this game, and even the calls they did make. The horse collar tackle on Eric Kendricks early on in the game, I didn't really get a good angle to see. It didn't feel like he actually got like between
So
the chest plate
the
there.
replay, the replay to me looked like he only got the numbers, and that's hard to see as a bang bang play. Like I thought it might have been a legit horse collar, but it looked like he was only at the numbers, which to my understanding is not a horse collar. It has to be up to the nameplate, I think.
There was a missed holding call on TJ Hawkinson in the end zone that the replay angle showed was. I mean, it's not the worst DPI or holding call you've ever seen, but looked pretty clearly to be a holding call that was not called. There was a lot of pass interference calls when the Vikings were on the field where it was kind of like let them play, but then when TJ Hawkinson does something, then that's definitely offensive pass interference, which I don't usually see offensive pass interference called because somebody's trying to make a play on the ball to prevent an interception. Like that, I didn't really get that
Okay,
one. People
that one
did.
I
I will
got because
say.
he tackled the guy.
I will say that Christian Darrisaw holding call I thought was fair. At first I was like, I'm not sure, but when I saw it on the end zone angle of the all-22, he did clearly get. It's kind of a weird play because I think it was Matt Milano was trying to like pull rush Christian Darrisaw, that's never going to happen. But Darrisaw basically like he doesn't get low because he doesn't need to, because he's Christian Darrisaw, like strongest dude on the team, and Matt Milano is a has less than 100 pounds on him or whatever, but he does grab the back of his jersey as he's pushing him to the ground, and so I understand why they would call that one holding. I thought that was a fair call, but pretty much everything else, and I think pretty much all the other complaints you've heard about this game are legit. So not the referees, not the Zebras' best day in the office. I will say, in terms of efficiency, yeah, it's true. I mean, some of the things the Vikings skirted by a little bit on explosive plays on third down. They skirted by a little bit on contested catch opportunities. I think up until this game, Justin Jefferson has not been particularly good on contested catches throughout the year, and then he goes and catches like 9 of 12 or whatever in this game. So that's something that you would expect to regress back down a little bit. So I think when you look at kind of the explosives they had on contested catches, the explosives they had on third downs, those are things that maybe you wouldn't expect to see. But at the same time, they were very efficient running the ball, and that's even without the 80-yard Dalvin Cook touchdown. I thought, like in overtime, Dalvin Cook. This is a weird game because you don't normally think of this about Dalvin Cook because he's not Derrick Henry or a bruiser, but he got a lot more efficient as a runner as the game went on. And that overtime drive, it was like 10-yard run after 9-yard run after another 10-yard run. So I thought they were very efficient moving the ball. The Bills actually were better in terms of success rate or conversion rate on third downs. There's how do you measure all that up? I would say on balance, if the Vikings replayed this game, you maybe don't expect the Vikings to win this one, but also like when this game shouldn't have even gotten to this point because the Gabe Davis catch should have not been ruled, so maybe it shouldn't have gone to overtime, and the 12 men on the field should have been called so that the Vikings should have just gotten that touchdown. Josh Allen should have never had a chance to throw that other interception. I don't know how you weigh all that too. So all that's to say, I feel a lot better about the Vikings after this game, but did the Vikings like quote unquote deserve to win based on what you expect to happen going forward? I don't know. I think there's reasons to think that the Bills are still a very good team despite everything that happened, and hopefully there is a rematch, because if there were one, it would mean it would be a Super Bowl rematch, and I think that would be a pretty fun storyline.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to play the Bills again this season for that exact reason. And like you said, I think honestly, if you ask me to pick a Vikings Bills game in Buffalo again, I'm picking the Bills still. Now, maybe not this week, given all the snow that's going to happen and the Bills' absolute ineptness running the ball. But you know, I think the Bills are still a better team than the Vikings, and I don't think there should be a massive uproar about how the Bills are power rated over the Vikings on a lot of places, or that the Vikings got a little bit lucky with this win. But I agree with you that I think it does tell us that the Vikings are a lot closer to the Bills level than maybe we thought before this game, right? Because I think we talked about it here last week where we were saying, if Josh Allen plays and he's relatively healthy, which I think is what happened in this game, right? I think Josh Allen played and he was relatively healthy. His arm didn't seem to be all too hindered, although we can't really know from the outside by that UCL injury. I thought the Vikings were going to lose by a pretty significant amount. The Bills were touchdown favorites, I think, for a reason. But the Vikings stuck with them, and we kind of kept our one-score game magic going. So this makes me feel a lot better moving forward about the team being competitive against those higher echelon teams like the Bills, or I guess the Eagles, if we were to rematch against them or something. And I think we're going to be very competitive against another team who I think is pretty good in the Cowboys in this next week. But why don't we just talk a little bit more about the specifics in this game? I think the Kirk to Jefferson, connection really shown and is something I kind of want to highlight here. So can you give us, your view on Kirk Cousins trusting Justin Jefferson and then Justin Jefferson's level of play overall?
Yeah, I mean, Jefferson, I described this elsewhere as the apotheosis of Justin Jefferson, his ascension to godhood. He's no longer a mere mortal walking among us. He is now a god. But I mean, he put up 193 yards against the best defense in the NFL, granted, a little undermanned, but still, they were coming into the game as the number one defense by DVOA, and he just shredded them. And he was able to get wide open. I know there were a lot of contested catches, but also he was able to, he ran a route. He wasn't targeted on it, but he ran a route where he caused the cornerback to just completely fall on his face. So anytime Justin Jefferson runs routes like that, that's always a good day for him in the office. But yeah, the contested catches, 10 catches on 15 targets. I think PFF charted 9 of them as contested catch opportunities. I don't think... Not all of them were like a guy had his hand on the ball as well. Like that, there was the 4th and 18 catch, but I think a lot of them were just throws into tight windows that Jefferson, the touchdown throw was a throw into a tight window. But I think you're starting to see a level of play from Kirk Cousins that maybe it doesn't stuff the stat sheet, but it is a winning style of football. And I think this is where a big disconnect comes when people who look at the box score, people who look at his PFF grade from this game, both of which were very underwhelming. He had, 2 interceptions and 1 touchdown. His passer rating was only 71.8. That probably ranks pretty darn low for Kirk Cousins in his career. His PFF grade was 50.1. That was the 4th lowest of 33 qualifying quarterbacks this week. So very poorly graded, very poor stats when you look at a stat sheet, and yet I think this was a very winning style of football. That if he keeps this up, it's very encouraging. It was another game when he was throwing into a lot of tight windows. We said this last week after the Washington game and after the Miami game. He's throwing into tight windows. He's trusting his receivers to make plays on the ball, and especially this game, his receivers were rewarding him with that trust. So, I mean, there are a lot of throws that Cousins made in this game that I don't think 2020 or 2021 Kirk Cousins makes. The one that stands out the most to me is it was actually a throw to Thielen, but it was a design screen where Dalvin Cook isn't able to release upfield, and Cousins just rolls out of the pocket and throws to Adam Thielen downfield. Completely, it's not like that's an alert route or something. This is just Kirk Cousins being like, "Oh, the play didn't work as designed. I'm just going to do backyard football and make something happen. That's something you almost never see Kirk Cousins. I've never seen him do that on a screen before. I've seen him like make something happen when the route designs don't work exactly as intended, but not on a screen. So that was something crazy. There was the
Yeah.
other one to KJ Osborne. It was only a 7-yard pass, I think. But Von Miller got pressure on Kirk Cousins. Kirk stepped and broke the pocket to evade it. I think Von Miller. It was an inside counter move, so Kirk kind of rolled out to the right a little bit of the pocket, and that caused two of the interior rushers to get in his face as well. So he basically eludes, sidesteps Von Miller. He steps up in the pocket, and there's another guy there, and then he takes another sidestep. He basically turns three would-be sacks into non-sacks, and then chucks it off his back foot like a perfect pass to KJ Osborne. Granted, only 7 yards downfield, but like from all the way to the sideline. So these are the kinds of plays that I'm not used to seeing Kirk Cousins. And when you throw on top the fact that the last throw he made in overtime before they got into like the low red zone, which was a corner route into double coverage, and it was just perfectly placed. That's not a throw Kirk Cousins attempts normally. So all these tight window throws, all the aggression, I thought that was really exciting to see. And obviously, Justin Jefferson is just like, this is the greatest game by any wide receiver I've ever witnessed. And it's not just the greatest catch that I've ever witnessed, which it was. I mean, it was the Odell Beckham catch, except it was contested, and also it was on 4th and 18, which how often do you
Yes.
see those converted? And also, it wasn't like a great throw; it was a little overthrown, which is why Jefferson had to make it. But the fact that he was able to get his hand up on there, those giant. I mean, he's not the world's tallest receiver, but he's got giant arms. That's why that guy, he was once described as Euro step Gumby by an NFL scout, and that's the Gumby right there, was those catches. And being able to turn the interception into a reception and have it never touch the ground, like that was insane. And it was just like one of 10 insane things he also had the key block to spring Dalvin Cook loose on that 81-yard touchdown. He was breaking ankles when he wasn't targeted. I mean, this was I've said it before, and now I think after going into enough depth, I don't think, hopefully it doesn't sound hyperbolic anymore, but this was the greatest game by a wide receiver I've ever seen. So we are all blessed to be able to have Justin Jefferson on our team and get to watch him every week.
Yeah, it's really difficult to describe how good this game from Justin Jefferson was, right? Like it's just like there were so many things constantly, and just the level of contested catches, right? I think he had 9 catches per NGS that he had less than a 50% chance of catching, which is crazy. PFF charted him with 7 contested catches. I think that's the most contested catches in a single game PFF has ever charted. Like his my ball mentality and his ability to take the ball away from defenders, even when he wasn't creating gobs of separation, which we know he's fantastic at creating separation, right? You can look at all 8 other games this season to see Justin Jefferson creating a ton of separation. It's not something I'm concerned about him being able to do, but him showing, just the consistency in this game of making those contested catches, even when he doesn't get the separation, was phenomenal. And just to wrap up Kirk a little bit, I think what you're saying is very important because, I've been very critical of Kirk in terms of his ability to make those plays off structure and to kind of trust himself and make aggressive plays. And he's been really making those plays since the bye. I don't think it's just this game, although this game's really a key part of that. But I think, we've seen Kirk's ability to be efficient, right? And be an efficient passer and throw the ball very efficiently, rack up tons of stats, rack up tons of yards, whatever you want, rack up great efficiency numbers. But we haven't seen him be able to turn it on in critical moments and be clutch like he has been in this game, like he was in the Washington game on a consistent basis throughout his career here with the Minnesota Vikings. So I think that's a really important factor. And that's what I wanted Kevin O'Connell to unlock in him. And I think he might be doing it. I'm not fully sold yet where, we're only halfway through the season, if you can believe it or not, right? We've only got 9 games. We've still got 8 more games to go. But it's a really good sign the way Kirk is playing to me.
I mean, the fact that
So if
O'Connell's
we,
calling plays that are essentially just throw the ball to Justin Jefferson that's a sign.
yes,
Like that's not something Kirk Cousins does. Kirk Cousins throws to his 4th wide receiver on a go route on 3rd down because that's what the playbook says is the correct read, even though he's got Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen on him. Like that's Kirk is not. This is always one of the big criticisms with Kirk is he just follows the letter of the he follows the playbook to the last letter, and he doesn't trust his receivers and just feed Justin Jefferson. And now he's finally doing it. And we're seeing that when he does that, it makes the team capable of beating the Bills, even when we also get a heaping dose of bad Kirk. Kirk who literally throws to a Bills player because he thought it was Justin Jefferson, which, like,
Yeah.
in terms of the all-time bad Kirk interceptions, that one was up there. And he throws another interception, which the first one wasn't his fault, I don't think, because KJ Osborne got bumped off his route path, which is why the pass sailed. It was arguably still high, but I think I don't put that one on Cousins. And there was another one he threw to Adam Thielen in double coverage, which was dropped. That was in the 2-minute drill in the end of the first half. But anyways, there was a lot of bad Kirk in this game. I mean, he only completed 60% of his passes. There was a lot of passes airmailed to nowhere. He threw 2 interceptions. There was the fumble to Dalvin Cook when Dalvin Cook recovered it. So there's a lot of bad Kirk. We don't have, and like that's all just to say, like, I understand why PFF didn't love him for this game, but to sort of put a bow on your thoughts, I think these are the sort of ingredients which, if you combine this level of play, but you bring back 2020 Kirk or 2021 Kirk, who is extremely accurate and extremely good at executing the plays calls as designed. We haven't quite seen Kirk play up to that level so far this year. That's what elite quarterbacking in the modern NFL looks like. So would be very exciting if we're able to put all those ingredients together. And if I can take that, I think we should also talk about the defense in this game, because I have a very similar feeling about the Vikings defense coming out of the bye. I mean, the last few weeks, I feel like when we went into the bye week, we both talked about the team needs to work on communication, needs to be able to be at its spot right away, needs to stop having snaps where Hicks and Kendricks are looking at each other confused about, oh no, you're supposed to line up on the other side. You aren't seeing that anymore. And as a result, I think that's exactly why you're seeing more pass breakups. Shannon Sullivan had one on 3rd down early on. You're seeing more interceptions. I think that's because people know where they're supposed to be. I think you're seeing quarterbacks move on from their first read because Eric Kendricks is right there in the passing lane, whereas before he would have been just a tick late to his spot. So I feel like that you saw that in this game, but it's also a trend you're seeing. And we knew there would be growing pains with this scheme, and I'm kind of happy and encouraged to see the fact that in just the last few weeks, the Vikings have the 7th best defensive EPA per play, and that's despite playing teams like very good offenses like the Bills, but also the Cardinals. Maybe not the Commanders with Heineke, although they're better with Heineke than they are with Wentz. But all that to say, like, the defense looks a lot. And by the way, that Commanders game, like, yes, the Commanders put up 17 points on us, but that's because the offense went 3 and out and was really struggling to. It was kind of the defense that held them in that game. So for some very strong defensive performances lately, especially accounting for matchups, and I think you're starting to see how it's all kind of coming together. And even in this game, yes, coming back a little bit to our earlier conversation, we talked about, like, yeah, some of the Vikings' success here was unsustainable. Well, it's also unsustainable for Josh Allen to convert back-to-back 3rd and 17s, or for Josh Allen to just scramble forever. Like, that's not something you're going to see every week. So I was very encouraged by the defensive performance. Obviously, they still got 30 points hung on them, but I felt like a lot of the things were like they were getting a lot of pressure on Allen and just weren't able to get home, or they were able to cover guys downfield, but Stephon Diggs was able to make a miracle catch, things like that. So I feel like the defense is getting better, especially when you compare it to the miscommunications and errors early in the season. Do you have any thoughts on the defense generally, or just this game specific?
Yeah, I think that you make a pretty fair point that Josh Allen was doing, some unsustainable things to keep those drives going. Obviously, it felt like even when we got negative plays, which we got a fair number of negative plays early in the set of downs, the Bills were able to make up for it in one way or another. A lot of times that was Josh Allen running with the ball in this game, right? And I think if I go back to Kirk a little bit, I think the way Kirk is playing, and then also the way the defense is playing, just being opportunistic and having a good pass rush, I think helps. But it's what allows us to be competitive against teams like the Bills, where we really haven't been competitive against that class of football team in years past. So I think that that's really key. And Josh Allen is probably going to make 1 or 2 of those 3rd and 17 plays a game. And I guess what you really have to do is weather that storm where he's making those plays. As a defense, hopefully get a stop later on the drive. We weren't very good in that in the first half, but we were really good at that in the second half, right? We were really good at limiting the Bills in the second half. Obviously, they only scored 6 points, and the last three were on that final desperation drive where they kind of got gifted a little bit, that 20-yard play, right? That's not to say the Bills wouldn't have driven down still and had a chance at a field goal. I think there's a pretty good chance that they would have. But, the defense overall in the second half, especially with the pass rush heating it up and getting after Josh Allen, where they might have missed him in the first half, they were able to at least corral him enough to prevent any big plays from happening in the second half. So I think that's really critical. I think you mentioned the communication has been a lot better. And then obviously we have a guy who I think, despite his age, is kind of playing out of his mind, or mentally, he's just kind of on another level right now, seeing the game. And Patrick Peterson, who obviously got both of the interceptions in this game, one was just a heads up veteran play where his receiver went out of bounds, so he knows he's an ineligible receiver, and he just kind of peeled off of it and found where the ball was going to go. And then the other was maybe even more of a heads up veteran play where they're running double post against quarters. And basically he knows that the Bills like to run this against quarters in the red zone. So it's a situational awareness thing. And that's something, in terms of tendencies that players think about all the time in terms of what am I going to see from the player who's across from me? What routes do they run in this situation? And he was able to undercut that route because Josh Allen's going to trust his arm to fit that ball in there, is what he said after the game. And he makes the interception to seal the game. So it was just really, really great. And we're getting fantastic play from Patrick Peterson. That's especially important because obviously Cameron Dantzler went to IR last week, and Caleb Evans was out with a concussion in this game as well. So I think Patrick Peterson has been a huge piece.
Yeah, I mean, he's second in the NFL in interceptions. He's second in the NFL in pass breakups. I do think he has gotten beaten a couple times. And, even in this game, there was that, I guess, call it a squirrel route or kind of a double move comeback against Patrick Peterson, who was in quarters technique, I believe, early on in the game. And Diggs did his. The way Diggs can just stop on a dime, I don't think anybody else can stop the way he stops. Like, he'll go full speed to just stop in like 2 or 3 steps or something. But like on a dime, like literally on the surface area of a dime, and just send corners flying back behind him. And that happened to Patrick Peterson. And also the first scoring drive, Patrick Peterson made some got juked out of his shoes a little bit by the running back on 2 occasions, including I think on that touchdown run. But all that considered, like, he's playing at a very, very high level. And this is what the shell defense is supposed to do. I hate that I realize now I'm using that terminology, even though I hate it, but it's come to have a meaning for me, so it makes sense. Like, the off coverage that they're playing with living out of too high is resulting in more plays on the ball for their playmakers, especially Patrick Peterson, because he's so smart at it. And Harrison Smith too. I think Harrison Smith's interceptions are also a product. I mean, if you have old veterans who are very, very savvy, which is what Patrick Peterson and Harrison Smith are, this is the sort of scheme that will allow them to get production. So when you look at like right now, the Vikings have the second best turnover differential in football, and some people might say, "Oh, that's just good luck coming their way. That's bound to regress because turnover production isn't stable." I think usually that's true, but also I think Donatell's defense is designed to give you a numbers advantage in coverage to allow players to be able to make plays on the ball a little bit more. Both in terms of the guys underneath, the linebackers underneath, or the safety if they're not playing a true too high coverage, or in terms of the cornerbacks being able to undercut the route, which is what Patrick Peterson did on that second interception. So both very, very high level plays, really great stuff from Peterson. You had on that first interception, like, just being able to know that, like, oh, he broke the pocket, I can knock my guy out of bounds, and now I can just sort of float over and make a play on the ball. Like, that's very impressive to do. Like, for me, like, it's like I knew that, but I would have to like process it for him to just be like, okay, I'm matched up against their 180-pound receiver. I'll just shove him out of bounds and then like be able to like roam. Like, that's crazy high level awareness. And then the second one just being like, I know that this is going to be double post because of where they are and that they really like to run this route near the red zone. So I can just undercut the post because Josh Allen is the kind of guy who's going to try and rifle that in there rather than throw it to the back of the end zone. Like, being able to just know all that stuff, do all the tape study, and just like pull it off Really, really impressive stuff. Really awesome to see. And I'm also really happy because I felt like I was kind of banging this drum that Patrick Peterson last year was playing really well and nobody believed me. And now I feel like he's getting the interceptions. He'll probably be a Pro Bowl cornerback this year. I mean, he's the fourth highest graded cornerback, a starting cornerback in football right now. He certainly has the interceptions and the pass breakups for it. And I'm not sure I'm quite there because I feel like there's been a lot of bad plays too that he, has gotten maybe lucky on, or the wide receiver dropped the ball. Talk about that Christian Watson drop touchdown, or some of the other plays, or some of the run defense. But I can't deny, like, the ball production is awesome, and it's really good to see. And it's also good to see because it's supposed to happen from the scheme, but also it's a sign that, like, this guy is a future Hall of Famer. As Harrison Smith said at the end of the game, get this man his gold jacket.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Get Patrick Peterson his gold jacket. Get a late career Pro Bowl or All Pro nod. Even if I agree with you, he probably hasn't played up to that level of one of the top, 5 or 6 corners or whatever you need to be in the NFL. Just because of some of the mishaps and because his assignment isn't as difficult as a guy who you're asking to be in man coverage all the time. But I still think, he's due to his production, I think he's pretty likely to get that and their name recognition. One last thing I just wanted to hit on real quick is once again praise for the pass rush. I probably mentioned it a little bit, but Zadarius Smith had a pretty nice game. I think he racked up a ton of pressures. Daniil Hunter had a sack. He had a really nice pass rushing game as well, to my eyes. But Harrison Phillips really turned it on in the pass rush. Like, he was dominant in this game. He's what we needed stepping up for Dalvin Tomlinson, who's injured. Obviously, they play a slightly different position, but on that one Zadarius Smith sack that I think there was also holding on, he's the one he forced a holding by literally running over center Mitch Morse. Right. And that was one where I don't know if Mitch Morse actually was holding. It's kind of like the Christian Darrisaw play where I don't know if they were actually holding, but they were with the guy on the ground. And it was kind of an opposite scenario where Darrisaw beat his guy and Mitch Morse lost so badly that he ended up on the ground right there. But I think he also drove Josh Allen into another sack. Like, he just had a dominant game rushing on the interior against the center, against a player, Mitch Morse, who is a very highly paid center and a well-respected and good center in the NFL. So I was really impressed with Harrison Phillips' game.
Yeah, he was awesome. Really, he was his usual stout self in the run game, but to get 7 pressures, that's something he's never done before,
Yeah.
and it's really encouraging. And I won't belabor the point, but I will say, people say this Vikings team, they've been scraping by on all these one-score games, and there's a lot of things you can say, like, oh, they're getting lucky in this way and that are like, yeah, that's true, but also I think if you just look at this roster, they have some dogs, they have some really good players, and I've made this point before, but, like, who are the teams that, like, you really need premium players come the playoff times? It's tackles, it's pass rushers, it's defensive linemen, and it's the quarterback and the weapons. And I think right now you look at this Vikings roster, they have arguably the best tackle duo in the NFL with the way Darrisaw is playing. And shout out Brian O'Neill. I mean, he did give up that 1 sack to Von Miller, but that was like one of only 2 wins Von got against him all game. O'Neill was going toe to toe with Von Miller, and Von Miller, I think, was giving him everything he had, and he still looked like an elite pass rusher. But I think I would say even with the sack, O'Neill won that matchup. Darrisaw, by the way, is now the highest graded offensive lineman, not just tackle, but offensive lineman in football. So you're talking about maybe arguably the best tackle duo in football, maybe arguably the best edge rushing duo in football. There are a lot of good ones, but Daniil Hunter and Zadarius Smith, I think, are both right now top 10 graded pass rushers, maybe top 11. They're both really, really good, and they have the sack production to show for it now. And you talk about, is there a better set of weapons in football than Justin Jefferson? I mean, start right there and end the list if you need to, but also Adam Thielen, who's doing really good, and TJ Hawkinson, and Dalvin Cook and KJ Osborne as your 4th and 5th options. Like, that's, like, who has a better set of weapons in football than those? Like, that's the kind of roster that can make a run in the Super Bowl, especially if Kirk Cousins, we get not just average Cook, but we get not just, or even not just good Kirk, but like elite Kirk, like wins football games on his own Kirk. Like, so I think, the interior pass production might not be great, and like the secondary is a little bit older, but like you can scheme around these things a little bit. You can't beat having no pass rush, having no tackles, having no answer in the trenches. Right now, like not just the edge rushers, but even Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips, everybody's playing at a high level. The only guy in the trenches who isn't is Ed Ingram, and I feel like rookies show progression. So all that to say, maybe I said I wouldn't belabor the point, and I am belaboring the point, but all that's just to say, like, I think this is a really, really good roster. I think this is one of the best rosters in football, especially because they have premium talent at premium positions.
Yeah, premium talent at premium positions. The places there are holes are kind of the ones that are less premium. Well, corner's a premium position, and I'd argue we have a hole there. But what NFL team right now doesn't have flaws? Maybe the Eagles are the closest thing to it, but they just got gashed on the ground all game by Washington, right? So I think, there are very few teams without flaws, and the Vikings are one of the least flawed teams in the NFL. So one player you mentioned in the weapons, and he is, of course, probably the best weapon we have on offense. Forget Justin Jefferson. Nick, talk to us about CJ Ham's touchdown.
Yeah, I thought this one was it was one of the more interesting low red zone touchdowns. Obviously, this is I think O'Connell's like eighth low red zone touchdown that has just been like schemed up very very easily. A lot of them have been wide open touchdowns, but now we've gotten a couple ones where it's like running in the low red zone and guys get virtually untouched into the end zone. So I thought this one was really interesting. They lined up. They had Dalvin Cook in the backfield. They had CJ Ham offset as like a sniffer or like kind of right behind the tackle. And they had I think two wide receivers. I forget the exact set. But at the snap, it's zone motion to the left with Adam Thielen coming on the jet motion the other side. And they make it look like they're going to hand it off to Thielen on the jet motion, which is something they've done and scored touchdowns on with just a simple jet sweep. But it doesn't go to Thielen, and then so they fake the pitch to Dalvin Cook, who's running against the grain. So the zone blocking is going right. Dalvin Cook follows Adam Thielen, and so it would kind of be like a counterplay where Thielen now, instead of becoming the sweep player, is the lead blocker for Dalvin Cook out into the backfield. It actually looks like Dalvin Cook would have had a walk-in touchdown that way, but instead this time it's another one of of Kevin O'Connell's triple fakes. So he fakes the handoff to Thielen, fakes the pitch to Dalvin Cook, hands it off to CJ Ham instead, who just follows it like a normal sort of inside zone type run, and CJ Ham just follows his blockers right upfield, and the jet motion takes out a couple of the players who should have been filling in, and then Ham is just sort of able to sort of walk in. So both the eye candy, the having to respect the pitch, the traffic in place of having the guy who was sort of following Thielen around the formation ends up knocking into a couple guys who would have otherwise maybe been able to make a play on Ham a little bit earlier. All that allowed Ham to sort of plow forward. Ham is also just, he's, I wouldn't say he's like elusive, but he will plow through. They call him the hammer for a reason. Will plow through contact. So all that, I think all that combined, well deserved. Love to see CJ Ham getting touchdowns. But also just like a really cool play. And we've mentioned this before, but a lot of these like low red zone play designs are fun because you can see them being like, oh, next time they could do this. Next time they could just pitch it to Dalvin Cook, and I think they would have a touchdown. Next time they could just hand it off to Adam Thielen and have the jet sweep just be a simple jet sweep and see if that works too. So I think the play design is so fun, and it's also fun to see how it can iterate on itself. So I'm excited to see what like the 9th and 10th low red zone touchdown play design is going to look like, because each one of these sets up the next one. So really well executed there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like you said, it feels like it's been a never-ending sequence of building off of the same play to get the next touchdown. And I think it's been really fun to see that from Kevin O'Connell. And it seems to be something that he kind of has. It's like an endless well that he can go to, right? At least once a game, right? I don't think you're going to get multiple of these touchdowns in a game in the red zone, but we've been a really efficient red zone team. This week we struggled a bit more, but we still got that CJ Ham TD. I'm going to call a little bit of an audible here. We talked about Donatel's defense and kind of how that's gelling a little bit more. We've alluded to that earlier. Why don't we move on to the Cowboys game that's coming up on Sunday? It's going to be the afternoon game. It's the Romo game, so we get the Tony Romo treatment on CBS, nationally broadcast, all that fun stuff. And the Cowboys, coming in at 6-3, they came off of a loss to the Packers where they played their own overtime game. So The Vikings, even with an overtime game, maybe aren't having as much of a hangover, or they'll be equally as hungover as the Cowboys were against the Packers, right? Where Cowboys went up big. They went up 28-14 and then kind of fell apart in the fourth quarter. The Packers were able to come back, tie the game, and kick the game winning field goal in overtime. But the Cowboys are going to bring what has been a very efficient run game, and that's something the Bills started to gash the Vikings with early on, but weren't able to continue to run successfully against the Vikings in our game. Tony Pollard has absolutely gone off in Ezekiel Elliott's absence, and I would imagine even if Zeke's back this week, he's kind of week to week with an injury, that they'd use Tony Pollard more effectively in the run game this week, or more often in the run game, rather than they had been previously when Zeke has been healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
But
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So on top of that run game, they also have Dak Prescott back. They've had a couple of really nice passing weeks. The Packers game last week, Dak ended up throwing 2 interceptions, so you can kind of force him to throw the ball into coverage a little bit. He wasn't as efficient in the passing game last week. And on the offensive line, I think they have a little bit of a weakness. Rookie Tyler Smith at left tackle. Their right tackle is also Terrence Steele, who was an undrafted free agent, who's developed into a quality starter for them. But I think they might be a little bit ripe for the picking for Zadarius Smith, who we can also move inside against Connor McGovern, who's one of the worst guards in the league. Tyler Biadasz is just okay as a center. Zach Martin, obviously, we're not going to, I think, isolate him in pass protection at all, being probably the best guard in the NFL. But I think there are weak points on this offensive line that we can exploit in the pass game, get Dak to move off his spot, and maybe he tries to force a ball or two into our coverage as well. So run game and passing game for the Cowboys next.
Yeah, I mean, it only takes one for Zadarius Smith to prey on, and I think it's probably going to be Connor McGovern, unless they don't think Biadasz has the power to withstand Zadarius Smith. Sometimes you get with those, if you can scheme up those one-on-ones against centers, sometimes those are the weak points. But yeah, I think Danielle Hunter it's going to be advantage Vikings, at least in the trenches, looking at the Cowboys offensive line. Not something you've usually been able to say about the Cowboys offensive line lately, at least in recent years. CeeDee Lamb is extremely, extremely good. I feel like he gets a little overshadowed because of how good Justin Jefferson is, and in terms of that draft class, but exceptionally good at getting open. They're also very smart about how they use him. They will line him up all over, outside, either side, in the slot. You'll see him in the slot a lot, so CeeDee Lamb versus Chandon Sullivan is going to be very much advantage CeeDee Lamb. Gallup is also a solid possession receiver. Brown as well, and not somebody who's going to get like wide open, but these are guys who can catch passes downfield. And Dak is a significant upgrade over Cooper Rush, even if he's shaking off some of the rust still. And you mentioned Pollard, you mentioned Zeke. They're both that's kind of the gold standard for 1-2 punches at running back. This is a team with a lot of weapons and a very good quarterback. So they have the potential to put up a lot of points. And I feel like Dak's interesting because he's got great command of the offense. He's got great pocket presence. He's kind of if it weren't for the injury, I think he would probably be getting a little bit more hype because I feel like he was on the trajectory to be like the next great pocket passing quarterback in the NFL. Kind of like the way Tua is right now is kind of like how we were kind of seeing Dak's progression for a while. But like Tua's less of a question of like with Tua, the question is like how much of it is him versus the guys around him and the receivers he's throwing to in the scheme. Less question with that with Dak. So I have a lot of respect for Dak as a passer and for these weapons and for these running backs. So I think the Vikings will have their hands full, even if it's advantage Vikings in the trenches, because I think pretty much everywhere else it's advantage Cowboys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the skill position players against our secondary, I think the Cowboys have an advantage, especially if CeeDee Lamb is not matched up directly with Patrick Peterson. And I don't know what the status of Caleb Evans is for this game, but obviously that's going to be a concern as well if we have to have Andrew Booth or Duke Shelley out there. Like that's somebody the Cowboys could definitely pick on, because even if they don't put if they put CeeDee Lamb in the slot, they can still have Michael Gallup over to that side, and Michael Gallup is a quality receiver in his own right. So it's definitely something I'd be concerned about. If we flip it over to the other side of the ball, the Cowboys have had the second best defense by DVOA. So we went against the best defense in the Bills last week, and the Cowboys are the second best defense in DVOA. Obviously, they had a few issues last week, particularly covering the speed of Christian Watson. I mean, Christian Watson is a fast player, but I don't think he's all that good of a player. So I think their corners outside of Trayvon Diggs may be a little bit weak. I know Anthony Brown went out with injury during that game, and Jordan Lewis, who's their slot corner, is already out for the season. But, that's kind of skipping past the elephant in the room, which is Micah Parsons and the Cowboys pass rush, right? DeMarcus Lawrence, their other edge rusher, has also been having a dominant season. One of the things the Cowboys do a lot of is stunts. They've run stunts on apparently over 40% of their pass rush snaps. And we've talked about Ed Ingram struggling against stunts, right? So even if we feel really good about our tackles, if Darisaw is healthy for this game as well, because he's in concussion protocol too, on top of Caleb Evans being in there, if we feel good about Brian O'Neill and Christian Darisaw facing off against DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons, which I don't even know if I feel great about that, as well as those two tackles are playing right now, we might have to see them go against interior offensive linemen who I very much do not feel as good, against those guys, in a bit more space, right? In a stunt, you kind of spread the offensive line out and you get a little bit of space for Micah Parsons to work against slower guards. I think that's something where they can pick on Ed Ingram all day. With that being said, that pass rush and all that stunting leads to your ability to run into that. You can use the stunts and games the defensive line are going to do against them in the run game, and you can design runs to specifically attack those stunts. So that's something to look out for the Vikings early on, is running the ball and trying to get the Cowboys to kind of fall back and not pin their ears back so hard trying to rush the passer against the Vikings. And obviously Justin Jefferson, I think, is a mismatch against anyone. Excuse me, even Trayvon Diggs, who's become a lot more consistent of a player in his second year, even if he hasn't had the interception total so far. So I think that consistency has been good for them. But I think that Justin Jefferson can just beat literally any corner you put him up against in the league. So I'm not too concerned about Justin Jefferson getting his in this football game.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Is the Vikings are going to need to demand enough respect from their running game so that the Cowboys don't pin their ears back so much, because if they do, Micah Parsons has an argument for the best pass rusher in football. DeMarcus Lawrence, they can kick him inside. He's also very good. Sam Williams, a rookie, playing really well for them as well. They are arguably the best pass rush in the NFL, and it's true. While it's true that I don't think Micah Parsons is somebody who you're going to kick to the inside necessarily. So, like, with the Vikings especially, that's a big deal, because I kind of like Brian O'Neill and Christian Darisaw. I'll even take him up against Micah Parsons, maybe give him some chip help, but I don't hate that matchup for us. Well, actually, it'll be interesting to see if Parsons lines up at all outside Darisaw, because Darisaw is very good, don't get me wrong, but I do feel like sometimes he will still underset, or he will give up the edge, or he will be late to punch or late to react, and will wind up giving up the edge. With somebody who's times his snap as well as Micah Parsons does, and has as much of an elite get off as Parsons does, that could get him in trouble. So all that to say, like, yes, the Vikings need to be able to run the ball efficiently enough so that the Cowboys don't just key in on the pass, because when they do, they're also blitz heavy in addition to being stunt heavy. So you get all those things going, and I think the book is kind of out at this point in the season that, like, Kirk has been struggling a little bit against the blitz this year, that if that happens, then I think you could start seeing the Vikings really getting into those ruts that you see them in, where they go 3 and out a lot of drive stall early on, and they aren't able to put up points, and you're kind of having the defense gassed because the offense just can't stay on the field. So that's kind of what concerns me a lot. If they are able to hold up in protection, or they are able to keep the running game efficient enough, getting 5 yards a carry or something, to the extent where they choose to rush with 4 and maybe play 2 safeties back a little bit more than the Cowboys are used to, then I think I'm pretty comfortable saying, like, that's advantage Vikings. But the Vikings are going to have to earn it on the ground first.
Yeah, absolutely. I like you said, just to finish up there, the Vikings are going to have to earn it on the ground, and then I think that opens up the pass. Now that's like the old football guy kind of cliche, right? Establish the run,
Analytics,
all that
our analytics
nonsense. But
listeners are going to hate us, but it's true, okay?
yeah, like I think in this circumstance to combat the Cowboys pass rush, that's exactly what you want to do, right? You want to hit those guys in the teeth, make them think, have second thoughts about coming after the passer every single play, and then that's how you give Kirk the time to make those plays and make the passing
It's
plays. So
all about the
I
body
honestly,
blows, Matt is
even though it is
saying.
the yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's all about the body blows. Even with the old cliches, I think that in this instance they are pretty accurate. So I think another interesting storyline for this game is that as of right now, I believe the Cowboys are favored by 1 point. They opened as 2 point favorites against the Vikings. The Vikings are at home. Clearly, as we talked about earlier, Vegas is kind of with the quote unquote national media, I'll call them, where they haven't fully bought into the Vikings yet, and they've bought more into the Cowboys than they have into the Vikings. What do you think of that line, Nick? Do you think, because to me, when a game's within 1 point or within 2 to 3 points, I kind of see that as Vegas thinks, yeah, it's going to be a close game between these two teams, and probably a field goal difference is about what you can expect from the final score. Do you think it's going to be a close enough game where it's coming down to the final drive and it's going to be a field goal difference, or do you think the margin is going to be wider by the time the clock hits zero?
I mean, I think football is random enough that I think these are evenly matched teams. If gun to my head, I think the Cowboys, especially given some of the injuries the Vikings have with Tomlinson maybe out, um, you know Andrew Booth possibly starting at cornerback. I think the Cowboys right now are probably looking a little bit more talented if I had to pick just one. But I think the fact that it's at US Bank Stadium, which is one of the best home field advantages in football, I think is enough for me to say if it were just me putting my money on it, I would be betting on the Vikings right now. So I'm a little bit surprised to see the Vikings home dogs, even though I think the Cowboys with Dak Prescott are Super Bowl contenders and one of the best teams in football. So, but that said, like the difference between favoring the Vikings by one and favoring the Cowboys by one, not a huge deal in terms of win. We're talking about like 55-45 one way or the other. So, yeah, I get it.
Yeah. I kind of get where Vegas is coming from. Like you, I think the Vikings at home. I'm picking the Vikings to win this football game. And I would also put money. Like I don't bet on football, but if I bet on football, I'd probably be putting money on the Vikings. Like this is one game I'd circle this week with the lines to that I think Vegas has a little bit wrong. But like you said, there are some injury questions with the Vikings going in this game, so it wouldn't shock me if the Cowboys win. Like I don't think that the Vikings, just because they beat the Bills this week, are all of a sudden some sort of invincible team that looks down at the 6-3 Dallas Cowboys, who have star-studded talent kind of across the roster, and is like, oh yeah, we should confidently beat this team, right? I think it's going to be a close game, and I think it's going to be a competitive game, and hopefully the Vikings are able to come out on top. So with that, that's pretty much all we have for today. Nick, anything else you want to get to that we didn't get to talk about before we wrap it up here?
We should probably mention Darisaw still in the concussion protocol. He was a limited participant today, but if Darisaw is out and we've got Blake Brandel versus Micah Parsons, that's maybe a little bit of
Yes.
that would be a problem. Although I will say Brandel acquitted himself very well. I mean, he had some snaps against Von Miller in the Bills game, so if he can handle Von Miller, maybe he can handle Micah Parsons as well. Shout out to Chris Cooper. Vikings have hired a new offensive lineman every year, and I feel like maybe they finally found somebody, considering the fact that
Yes.
not just Darisaw making the leap to an all-pro level from a guy who was genuinely very up and down as a rookie, but not just Darisaw. Cleveland is having a career year. Bradbury's having a career year. Ingram is a rookie. Brandel came in and looked like a competent sixth offensive lineman. So shout out to that guy. Hopefully he's as good as like the results have been so far for the offensive line. So that gives me some confidence at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I think shout out to the coaching in general. I don't think the Vikings win as many close games as they have without really quality coaching job, not just from Kevin O'Connell, but from the rest of the staff. Understanding situational awareness. I mean, I know that's been hammered to us in pretty much just about every broadcast where they talk about situational masters or whatever. But it's clearly that emphasis, I think, has helped the team win all of these football games, right? Like, maybe Patrick Peterson as a veteran, has that knowledge within him, and that's been part of his game. But this whole team just seems to do such a better job than they did under Mike Zimmer in those 2-minute situations and those drills. And I think the coaching staff probably has a lot to do with it, right? That's the variable that's changed the most, I would say, from year to year. Like the roster hasn't really changed all that much, honestly. So I think that's a pretty good call out there.
You don't win 7 one-score games without some good game management. So helps a lot, especially at the margins, which has been the deciding thing in 7 games. So.
Yeah, and that's not to say that, the Vikings are going to win every one score of the game that they're in moving forward, but I do think coaching has played a little bit of a part, in addition to luck, in going 7-0 in these one score games. So, with that, we are going to wrap it up. I am Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. He is Nick Olson. You can find him at Nick Olson NFL. Gregg Blake, not with us this week, at You've Been Gregged.
He's still alive.
We are kindred. He is still alive. We're going to get him on the pod one of these days, we promise. But we are Kindred Skulls, at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. You can find us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, on iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us 5-star reviews there. It warms the small cockles of Nick's heart as he watches Minnesota Vikings games with his daughter.
Amen. And Skull. And we love you. And another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm because right now we've got Andrew Booth or Duke Shelley out there. So PFF number 1 graded Duke Shelley. Vikings legend Duke Shelley.
PFF number 1 graded Duke Shelley. Wow. Skull Vikings. I think it's time to end this now.
Cool, baby.
Another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind. And we'll score